Okay guys, in this video we're going to be talking about how to use the primitives here in MatterControl. So these are the primitives. These are going to be your building blocks that you create your projects out of. So let's get rid of Astronaut Boy here, and we will begin by clicking and dragging in a cube. After you've dragged in a primitive, over here on the right side of the screen, it'll bring up all the options that will allow you to manipulate this object. So let's start with output. We have two options here, solid and whole. So solid is going to be an actual printable object, and a whole is going to be, I guess you could call it like negative space. So if I drag in another primitive here, and I set this to whole, you can see it goes transparent in a way, I guess. And if we put these two together, and if I combine them, you can see that that whole takes a chunk out of our solid object. So that's the difference between solid and whole. Now if we click right here next to solid where it says color, we have the option to change the color of our object. Now this is just within the modeling screen. Obviously the color of your object when you print it is going to be dependent on what color of filament you have, but sometimes it can help and just be nice for when you're modeling and you have a ton of stuff in here to change the color. It just makes it easier to look at and easier to find stuff. If we click here on clear, that will get rid of any color and just reset it to white. We also have this option here called transparent. If we click this, it'll make our object go transparent. Now this is still a solid object. If we printed this right now, it would still print this object, so it's not a whole, but it is transparent. And that's nice because if you're trying to, let's say I was going to have this be inside of this cube, I'm able to see through the cube and see how this cylinder is going to line up inside of there. If you want to take it off transparent, just come here and uncheck this box. Now the last option here is called select, and what that allows us to do is select an object, hit select, and then select any other object on the screen to copy its color. Okay. Next up we have these options here that allow us to actually change the size of our object. So these sliders will, for the cube at least, adjust the width, depth, and height. And alternatively, you can just select these fields and input a measurement, and it will change our shape to match. Now by default, these are going to be set to millimeters. Now with some of the objects, we also have advanced options down below. So for our cube, our advanced option is to round off the edges and corners. And adjusting these sliders or these fields here will allow us to change how round our object becomes. So it can go from a sphere all the way to pointy corners. Alright, so that's the basics of using primitives. And that applies for all of the primitives here on this list. Now I want to actually step through some of these primitives, specifically the ones that have advanced options, because using the advanced options, you can sometimes manipulate the object in ways that maybe aren't completely obvious. Now all this stuff you could obviously figure out just by playing with it, but sometimes it helps just to have somebody point it out so you don't have to go and try to discover it on your own. So we're going to skip past the pyramid because it doesn't have any advanced options and come here to the wedge. Now the wedge, it's going to have the same options as the cube. You can adjust width, depth, and height, but I want to talk about the rounding options here. So right now it's set to none, but if we come and select up, you can see it now turns it into a quarter cylinder. If we select down, we get kind of this ramp shape. And the round segments here is going to determine how smooth this curve is. So by adjusting this, we can turn it back into a wedge or a nice smooth curve. And we can do that same thing when we round it up. Next up we have this text option, which isn't exactly a shape, but we'll just talk about it really quickly. With the text option, you are going to input the text you want here. So we could say when we hit enter, it'll update it here in the modeling environment. If we want to do multiple lines, we can select that here. And now we can input something of like a paragraph. So like so, beautiful. We also have the option to change our point size. I'm not sure why it's called point size. It's the same as font size, I guess. So this will change the size of your letterings. You can change the actual height of your letters. And you can change the font. So that's our text tool. Nothing too fancy there, but kind of a cool little tool. And next up we have the cylinder. Now, the cylinder, we can adjust the diameter and the height, but we can also adjust the sides. And this is something that should have been obvious to me, but I didn't realize until literally just a week or so ago, that by adjusting the sides, we can turn this from being a cylinder into something like a triangle or an octagon and so forth. If we come to advanced, we have these options called starting angle and ending angle. And what that allows us to do is kind of take a slice out of this. So I guess if we wanted, 3/4 of a cylinder, or you could go and do half of a cylinder or a quarter cylinder. So you can just adjust it with these. We also have this thing called diameter top, which, as the name states, allows you to adjust the diameter of the top, so we can bring this down to a point, or we can flare it out. So some cool options there with our cylinder. Next up we have the cone, and once again the cone, it doesn't have any advanced options, but it does have this side option, which will allow you to change this into various different shapes. Once again, this is probably obvious for you, but for some reason I didn't even think about it until a few weeks ago when I was playing around with this. Our half cylinder, once again, has this sides option, so we can change this from being a half cylinder into a parallelogram, I think is what this is called. But just different shapes that you can make by adjusting that side slider. The torus is kind of interesting. Once again, a lot of these have this option. It's sides, so you can change this into various different things like an octagon or a square or a triangle. And then we also have, in advanced, a few different options here. One is the starting angle, which allows you to take a slice out of it. And then we have ring sides and phase sides. And I think I'm actually going to take a slice out of this so that we can get a side profile view here. Ring sides is going to adjust how smooth the outside of our ring is. So I can take this all the way down to being a triangle, or all the way up to being a nice smooth circle all the way around. Now phase angle is going to cause this to rotate around itself. So I'm actually going to bring this down to a triangle because it'll be easier to see. And if I adjust this ring phase angle, you'll see it rotate around itself, like so. So that's our torus. Some cool stuff we can do there. Next up we have our cylinder. And just like we've been saying with all of these, we have our side slider. So we can adjust that. And then here in advanced, we have starting angle, ending angle, if we want to take a slice out of it. And then we have round. So round up is going to round off that top edge. Round down is going to give us kind of that ramp shape. And then when we select one of these, we're going to have direction. So if we round down outer, or let me actually take a half slice of this so that we can see it better. Or we can round in the inner and make kind of this bowl shape. In fact, if we take our inner diameter down to as small as we can get it, we have kind of this bowl looking thing. And if we do up and inner, you get this interesting shape. Or we can round it down, round up and then outer, and we get this dome shape. And then round segments is going to determine how smooth this is, so we can go all the way down to a triangle, like so, or all the way up to a nice smooth curve. So a lot of different things that we can create using our ring object. Next up is our sphere. With sides, we can take this from being a sphere down to something like down to kind of a triangular shaped thing. I don't know what you would call this. Then we have starting angle and ending angle if we want to take a slice out of this. And latitude sides is going to adjust the smoothness of it this way. So you can see we can go all the way down to this gem looking shape or up to a nice smooth curve. Now with this, if we were to give this 6 sides, you see we kind of get this gem looking shape. And actually, probably in the next video, we're actually going to use this shape and turn it into more of a classic cartoon rupee. Not much to talk about with the half sphere, just the longitude and latitude sides are going to allow you to change this into various other shapes. I don't know what this shape would be useful for, but I mean, I guess if you can figure out a use for it, good for you. Next up, we have image converter, and I'm actually going to make a separate video on this, otherwise this video might go on a little too long. And then we have the measurement tool here, which honestly I never use. I think this could be a nice tool, but at the moment I think it's just kind of underpowered and useless. Let me show you why. So if I drag in an object here, let me just crank up one side of this. First of all, with most of these objects, you can just hover over a corner and it'll bring up the dimensions for that object. So I don't know that you really need to use this a whole lot. I guess if you're measuring a complex object, then it could be useful. But my main problem with it is that to measure, you have to select these spheres here and drag them to where you want to measure from. But it's like, where exactly is it measuring to? I guess to the edge of this little point here. I don't know. So I guess you can get kind of accurate with it. I don't know. It seems like kind of a pain to use. So if you want to use it, great. But I don't use it very much. And then to get rid of it, you're just going to select this object here, hit delete. Next up, we have this comment object. This just allows you to add descriptions to your modeling scene. So maybe if you're going to pass this on to somebody else and you needed to tell them about certain objects, you could drag this in and add a description here. This little object you see right here isn't going to print. It's just there so that you can click on it and then get to the description and edit it. And then lastly, we have this called the variable sheet. And I'm going to make a separate video on this variable sheet because it's a pretty big tool and it'll just take too much time and make this video too long to describe it here. So that's going to be its own separate video. That's pretty much everything for the primitives. I guess one thing that I should point out is these objects that have the side slider and the starting angle and ending angle, as you adjust this, you're going to see that it doesn't change the number of sides we set here. It's just going to shrink those sides down. Alright guys, so that's going to do it for this video, I believe. I don't think there's anything else to really talk about. Once again, I'm sorry if this video was kind of just redundant and useless. All of this stuff you could figure out just by playing around with it. But like I said, some of it, like the sides and the different shapes you can make with that, I didn't realize that that even existed until a few weeks ago. So sometimes it can just be nice to have somebody point it out to you. So, I mean, hopefully you found this video to be kind of helpful. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.